My name is Joaquim Dos Santos. I am one of 3 directors on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse.
How did you start your career in animation?
If we're going way back, I grew up, I was born in Portugal, moved to Los Angeles when I was 4 years old, but I spent all my summers back in Portugal. But having grown up in Los Angeles, specifically the Valley, I grew up next to all the studios. So, on my way home from school, when I walked home from my high school, I walked past Film Roman where they were making The Simpsons. I could look into the windows and see them making The Simpsons. I loved comic books. I loved film. I loved animation. I was, in the States, we have a term called latchkey kid, which means if your parents are working, they give you the key, you go home, let yourself in, watch some shows, make yourself some food, and then your parents come home around 7 or 8 at night, because they're out working. So I was very much that, and it was right at the forefront of VHS, those were still pretty new at the time. So I had access to watching movies, and whenever I'd go back to Portugal, my aunt, my aunt and my father, they loved technology, so we had Betamax tapes, which were even higher end, nicer tapes, and I would just spend all my nights watching movies. So for me, I was a horrible student in school. I made terrible grades. I didn't really have any hopes of going to a big college or anything. So I took a job after high school and I was making coffee, but I always drew. I drew every day. When I was a little kid, my mom would say, "Are you okay? Do you want to go outside?" And I would just spend the whole day in my room drawing. And, I think sort of your passion will find a way to find itself and sort of make a way for you. And so growing up in LA and in the Valley and having access to all those studios, what happens is all the artists that were working at the studios during the day, they at night got together and made a little school that was unaccredited. It didn't get us any accreditation for regular schooling, but it was teaching storyboard classes, life drawing classes, character design classes, color theory classes, background design, all the things all the skills you would need to be into animation. And when I took my first storyboarding class, to me it was like everything I could have hoped for. It was sort of combining my love of storytelling, my love of film, because you had to think about camera, and you were learning camera theory. My love of comic books, because you're going sort of panel to panel to panel. It was everything in one. And once I found that, it became my absolute obsession to get a portfolio together to show around to studios. And my first job came completely by luck. I had a comic book store that I would shop at, and I became really good friends with the owner of the comic book store. And he had a sketchbook, and I did a sketch in the sketchbook. And one day he called me at the coffee shop that I was working at, and he said, "Hey, there was a director from Sony here. He saw your sketch, and he said, I need somebody to clean up my storyboards. And can I give him your number?" I said, "Of course, of course, of course." So they called me at the coffee shop. They said, "Hey, we want to offer you a job." And I said, "Hey, I quit. I think I'm working in animation now." And I took the job, and that was it.
What are the differences of working on a feature film compared to TV series?
There was absolutely a learning experience coming over to features. So in television, we would I'd talk to my friends that were working in features, or I'd sort of hear stories, and we have a term that the grass is always greener. It seems like, it's way, they're able to change the ideas, and they're able to really evolve ideas and get things to this really fine, razor sharp story point, And in TV, a lot of the times you have to be way more secure at the writing phase. The script is the blueprint for what you're going to make. And once we turn on the production faucet, the water's running. You have to make decisions. At the storyboard phase, you're thinking about your camera right off the bat. You're thinking about the emotionality right off the bat. Sometimes you're going to get some really high moments. Sometimes you're going to get some moments that don't land so great. But you're hoping that from episode to episode, the audience will hold on and be able to grab enough to carry you through the moments that aren't maybe the greatest. for film, it's not a matter of like this scene can be okay and then this one can be every scene, every moment, every frame has such a level of scrutiny on it, and you have to make every scene count, because if one ingredient is off, it can tank the film. If somebody at any point in the film switches their brain and starts thinking about the wrong thing, or is no longer along the emotional ride and thinking about the logic of, wait a minute, what's going on here and why are they doing that, then you've lost. So you can't afford to make bad steps in film. So that to me was a big learning experience. Oftentimes I would storyboard a scene. It was exactly in my brain as I wanted to see it, and we would present that, and they would say, it's cool, it's great, but we're really chasing this emotional feeling. How do we chase this emotional feeling? So I had to switch my TV brain off and go like, okay, let's lose all the work that we did for the past month, and let's all the team get together and talk about how we can achieve this emotional idea.
What was it like working on the sequel of the groundbreaking Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse?
Yeah, I mean, it is, so it's a bit surreal at times. I think, you know, I had a funny experience because I came in at the tail end of the first film while it was still being finished. It hadn't been released to the public yet, no awards, no nothing, you know. But when I was watching it in the screening room, I mean, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was like, this is completely different from everything else. Even our perception, you know, we were extremely familiar with what Spider-Man films were up to that point. And I had worked on Spider-Man TV shows. I sort of knew the pace of what those things were. And what I think Phil and Chris do really well is they take the familiar, they take the things that you sort of have expectations for, and they go and turn it to the side. So even the fact that they leaned into the idea that these things happen to every spider person all the time and it's unavoidable, and you know, those are all ideas that we'd sort of like, they're resting in the back of your head, but you to sort of conceptualize them and bring them to the forefront and make an audience realize like, oh my gosh, that's true, that happens to every spider person. If you break that rule, what happens to you? And in the first film, you know, they had this story device, the little goober, the little thing. It's a very common story device, and what they do so well is they ride the line between making you care about that story device and that plot device, and then also kind of winking at the camera and going like, look, it's the thing that's in every movie, that every character, they even called it the goober, you know? So the fact that those things were playing out in front of me, and then I was being tasked with sort of like, hey, so how do we go bigger than this one? My brain at the time, I couldn't think. I told them, I said, guys, I think you went as big as you could go. I don't know that there's any room to go. And they said, okay, we think there's still room to grow. So we pitched around some really basic ideas. And I think the one that really stayed was this concept that the first film was about these other spiders coming to Miles' world, right? And sort of invading his space. This film was about Miles and Gwen and his group sort of going out. So that's already a bigger idea, you know, from like a supernatural perspective. And then you tie to that all the things that we can relate to about being a kid at that age and your relationship to your parents and the idea that you're breaking away from home and learning to forge your own path. That balance, that's the key to making these movies.
Developing such a complex story took a long time. What was its evolution?
It does. It takes a lot of time, and it evolves over time, right? So it was a few different films before it was this film, and we had different, sort of plot devices. But again, you try to hold on to those sort of guiding lights, those basic ideas that sort of trigger an emotional response, and then you let everything else evolve around that. But the film, you know, and Chris and Phil, they would never hide from this. They're notorious for it. Like, they make changes all the time. They listen to audience feedback all the time. We screen these films for audiences, and depending, you know, they take that into account a lot. Because as specific as these stories can be, and as tied to telling very, you know, unique perspectives, they also have to, the themes have to play to like a really wide audience. So, you know, grandparents can enjoy it along with grandkids, and those themes can still be true no matter what age you are, no matter what culture you come from.
Miles and Gwen have grown in this second chapter. What do you think of this narrative choice?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's great about, making a sort of trilogy of films, or anytime you're especially if you're following kids, I think about like the Harry Potter films, we essentially watch them grow up, in front of the camera. And with animation, you have the choice not to do that. But I think one of the interesting things is, again, we're in such a supernatural setting in a crazy, fantastical world. What really resonates is the fact that these characters, their humanity comes across. And so that journey, if Miles was incredibly innocent and all these things were happening to him in the first film, when that same sort of stuff starts happening to him in this film, he's at an age now where he's able to sort of have some agency over himself, and sort of it's that age where you're sort of standing up to the authority, whether it's your parents or it's teachers, or you're learning to figure out what your boundaries are, what you're comfortable with. And we see Miles in this film sort of being in a place where he's sort of not quite figured out how to stand up for himself. And by the time he's on that confrontation with Miguel on the train, he tells him, I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to break all the rules. I'm leading the train now, So that relatability, I think, is something that we really took to heart for this film and in making this film. I think Gwen and Miles, we set up Gwen so strongly at the top of the film so that she could act as sort of a cautionary tale for Miles, coming out to his parents and saying, I think, I should tell them who I am. And when Gwen says, don't do it, you put your characters in these very real positions. I've had conversations with my friends that mimic that same thing. We've just put a spider mask on top of everything,
What is your personal definition of animation?
Personal definition of animation. A moving picture that evokes an emotional response. It can be as simple as you want it to be, as complex as you want it to be. It's the fact that a series of moving pictures from somebody's imagination can evoke an emotional response. At my panel, we showed how a simple line can look almost like nothing when it's static. And as soon as you give it a little bit of movement, it takes on a life of its own. That, to me, it's magic. It's magic every time I see it.
Thank you so much.
Of course.